Okay, I decided I would have a go at tackling some of the misunderstandings around DPI, which stands for dots per inch. It can also be referred to as PPI, points per inch. And there is so much misinformation about this subject that I just want to clear up a few things and give you a greater understanding. This is the monitor I use day to day. This is my iPad. I think one of the reasons you have so many misunderstandings is that there are three possible areas where you're going to find DPI or PPI, and also sometimes called LPI or lines per inch. That is to do with printers. But I think one of the reasons we have so much misunderstanding is dots per inch or points per inch or lines per inch can actually refer to three different things. It can refer to the picture we're looking at right now from the Solid Foundations course. I used her because some of you may already know her, you've done the tutorial. She appears behind the screen with whatever software I'm using at the time. Now I've got two programs open here. I've got Photoshop and I've got Procreate. And that image lives behind the computer screen. So let's call that in the computer. You also have print. And we're going to call this hard copy. This is what happens when you print out that file which lives behind the screen onto a printer. So behind the screen, hard copy. But there is also another area where you do find pixels or points or whatever, and that is the actual computer screen itself. Let's deal with that first. This is a ruler with inches marked off, and you can see I've taped off an area 1 inch square and also on my computer screen. And I've done that for a couple of reasons. One is that, well, I'm dangerous and exciting. But the other thing is I want to explode one of the myths which surrounds dots per inch. Have you ever heard this one? If you're going to create an image which is going to be seen on a computer screen, it has to be 72 dots per inch. So let me show you something. This is the same image which appears on two different computer screens. This one is an iPad Pro. And its screen resolution is 2752 by 2064. And that little inch square that you can see marked out there, there are about 264 little points or dots per inch inside that square. That is a lot more than 72 dots per inch. And look, let me show you something. I'm going to come here and I'm going to pinch in and pinch in and pinch in. That is my file zoomed up way close and personal, which is very easy for me to do because any image editing program can do this. It can zoom in and out as much as you want, and you can display things at full size, and you can display things zoomed up way close and personal. It doesn't matter. Let's take a look at Photoshop. If I come to my magnifying glass, I can do the same thing. I can zoom way up close, or I can press Control or Command plus 0 to zoom to fit. And incidentally, that screen you're looking at is a 4K monitor. It has 3840 pixels by 2160 pixels. And how many dots per inch is pretty much irrelevant because that's a 24-inch monitor. I've had a 22-inch monitor with the same resolution. So that would have a different amount of dots per inch, but it's a lot more than 72 dots per inch. So your first big take from this is that how many pixels wide by how many pixels tall your image is completely irrelevant to how big it's supposed to appear on the screen. That image that you're creating, how many pixels are long by how many pixels tall, does not matter to your computer. It does not matter to your computer screen. Any image editing software, whether it's on an iPad or an Android or your phone or a laptop or a desktop, they can all cheerfully show you the whole image like we're seeing now, and any image editing program can zoom in and still show you whatever you want to see. So a screen resolution of 72 dots per inch is just irrelevant. And now let me tell you why. A long, long time ago, in a land far away, a company with a very fruity sounding name brought out a computer, and this computer was special. It came with a mouse as standard and you could draw with it. And that had a screen resolution of 72 dots per inch. But that was over 40 years ago. And I'm showing you a diagram of different kinds of computers. And yes, there is the original Apple Macintosh with 72 dots per inch. And there are some other computing devices like an iMac, an iPad, a laptop, and they all have much, much more than 72 dots per inch. Things have moved on and we are not holding to the standards that we had over 40 years ago. So forget about 72 dots per inch. It's simply hopelessly out of date. Okay, so we're back in my office, and just in case you're tired of looking at the back of my head, hello, it's me. Okay, so hopefully that is 72 dots per inch laid to rest. And hopefully, because 72 dots per inch is more than 40 years old and completely redundant, we can just forget it exists. And hopefully the makers of big software, like for example Adobe, who make Photoshop, will just lose that 72 DPI field from wherever they have it inside Photoshop. And the same goes for a whole load of other manufacturers as well. It is dead. It is defunct. Let it go. Now, the next big thing, that is more relevant, but partially relevant. If you remember, I showed you, actually, I'll show you two. These are two different images I did on my inkjet printer. This one was done on glossy paper. This one was done on watercolor paper. This tells you a few things. The first thing is I need to recalibrate my monitor. The second thing, printers are just as much a pain in the bum as they were 40 years ago. Well, no, that's not true. They are better, but they're not perfect yet. Let's take a look at this one. Dots per inch are irrelevant to whatever sits behind the screen. Dots per inch are irrelevant to the screen itself, and we've already covered that. Dots per inch becomes relevant when you start printing things out. Now, this magic number, 300 dots per inch, that refers to how many little dots you can cram into an inch on some hard copy like some paper so that you can read it like I'm reading now. You can see I'm looking at this from the average reading distance, and this is supposed to be the distance where I don't see the individual dots or pixels that make up this image. And here's the next thing, 300 dpi or dots per inch, like 72 dpi or dots per inch, it's a magic number. But 72 ppi, that's completely defunct. 300 ppi is still partially relevant. Okay, so where does the 300 dpi rule come from? It comes from what offset printing presses did in the late part of the previous century. Offset printing, those are your professional printing presses, because they don't print as continuous tone images. They print half-tone dots. Those are tiny ink dots arranged in a grid. Now, printers don't measure in dots per inch, they measure in lines per inch. And typically your high-quality magazine or a book is printed at anywhere between 133 and 150 lines per inch. Or if you're printing it onto premium coated paper, you're looking at 175 lines per inch. But here's how we get to that 300 dpi number. For that printer to do a half-tone dot properly, they need about 2 pixels per half-tone dot. Here's a chart for you. You've got the kind of print quality on the left, you've got the lines per inch going down the middle, and so you've got the needed image PPI, which is points per inch, or DPI, which is dots per inch on the right. So for a newspaper, 85 lines per inch, which multiplied by 2 gives you 170 PPI or DPI. But the third one down, look, for a high-end print. Normally that's about 150 lines per inch, which if you multiply by 2, you get 300 dots per inch. It's not magic. Apple laser writers from about the 1980s to the 1990s printed at 300 dots per inch. So desktop publishing software, at the time the main thing would be something called Quark Express, and they adopted this rule that 300 dots per inch equals print quality. The teachers taught it, tutorials repeated it, and then nobody bothered to check the reason again. And also modern inkjets and modern photo printers, they use things called stochastic screening, and they have variable drop set sizes, and they don't have a fixed half-tone grid. So with a modern printer, 240 dots per inch is often indistinguishable from 300 dots per inch, and sometimes, depending upon what you're printing, 200 dots per inch will be indistinguishable. Now maybe 300 dots per inch survives because software companies need a single simple number because they know people are frightened about things like dots per inch. And maybe the reason we hang on to it is because people don't know much about dots per inch and they get scared. They feel like they should, but they don't. And so when you get a nice simple rule like 300 dots per inch is what you should draw at, it's a nice safe number, and so people hang on to that information. Okay, well, all that information is well and good, but what does that mean for you as an artist or a designer? It means you need enough pixels. Now, we were looking at Anna the Angler. Here's the actual file itself. If I zoom in on some of the finer detail, pretty soon you can see the individual pixels. That is because this is quite a small file. If I come up to my wrench icon, which I'm circling, then I've got the Canvas tab selected, and I'll come down to Canvas information at the bottom, tap on it. Let's come to our dimensions, which is on the left, second one down. And you can see pixel width 1800 pixels and pixel height 1200 pixels. This is not very many pixels at all. But while we're here, look, physical width and physical height. Physical width 6 inches and the DPI, which we've been talking about, is 300. So what is 6 times 300? It is 1800. And that leads us to a rule that you're going to hear quite a lot. If you're doing an illustration, and if and only if you are planning on printing it out so it comes into the physical world, the rule is for every inch you allow 300 pixels or dots. So 6 times 300 equals 1800. 4 times 300 equals 1200. So if I want to print out Anna the Angler at 6 inches by 4 inches, these are the dimensions I enter. But by now, I hope you realize this is the rule of thumb that's been around for quite a long time and is a little bit outdated, but nevertheless, it's a good general rule to follow. It is not a golden rule, it is a general rule. But hey, here's a picture of a billboard advertising the marvelous jellyfish world, which, in case I get any questions, it doesn't actually exist. I made up the whole thing to illustrate a point. That is a billboard. That is something you see when you drive past, and so that is seen from a long way away. You do not need 300 dots per inch to print out something like that. If you did, I am not sure how many computers could actually handle a file which is that big at 300 dots per inch. Here is a chart I want you to look at. It shows how many meters away you are because, let's face it, most of the world works in meters these days. And just for the sake of being difficult, I'm showing you how many dots per inch you are advised to have when looking at something from a meter away or however many meters away. And you can see that the further away something is, the amount of dots per inch you need goes down pretty rapidly. And just in case you find this initially confusing, please remember, the whole dots per inch, especially 300 dots per inch, is kind of a combination of what a printer can handle and what people reckon is around about the right number so that you can't see the individual dots. So 300 dots per inch and all these numbers here are there as guides only. It will depend on things like what kind of print you're going for, what kind of paper you're going for. But the one thing you can safely say is that 72 dots per inch is a waste of time. Okay, so here's a rookie mistake inside Procreate. You come to the plus sign in the top to create a new file. You tap on it. And what's the first item on the list? Screen size. That's the amount of pixels you have on the screen of your iPad, and people think, great, tap on that. There's my new file. And you know what? I will come out of the Drippy Cat Brush Studio. I will come to the Procreate library so we can all start on the same page. And let's find something. Let's try pastel would be a good one. Let's try Ravenswood. Let's try a nice bright red color. And what have we got? There you go. One lovely pastel-y texture until you zoom in, and pretty soon you start to see the individual pixels that make up that brushstroke. That is the point. Every single brush inside Procreate and any other bitmap-based program which has brushes that I can think of, they all do the same thing. If I tap on this, you have a mixture here of your shape, which is a little cluster of pixels doing nice things, plus also grain, which is another little cluster of pixels, and they go together to make an interesting texture. But for them to really do their thing, they need a certain amount of pixels on the screen. And if they haven't got enough pixels, they'll do what they can, but you're going to get this blocky effect. Let's come back to our gallery, and I'm going to come to my plus sign again, but this time I'm going to create a new canvas, and I'll really go to town with this. For the dimensions, well, the original iPad long dimension was 2,752, so I'm going to multiply that by 3, which is 8256. Then I'm going to come down to the one at the bottom. The original height was 2,064, so I'm going to enter 6192 pixels, which is 3 times the size. Now, on my pretty powerful iPad Pro, that gives me a maximum of 32 layers, because the bigger the actual canvas size, the less layers you're going to get. But I'll go with that for now. I'm not going to change anything else. Now, same brush, same color. Now try. You can see it's a bit smaller because the canvas is bigger, but the whole point is I can keep on zooming in and zooming in and zooming in, and because I have more pixels, I can zoom in a lot more before I start to see the individual pixels. And the upshot of this is, if I make this larger, I can get a lot more detail in there, and I can zoom in a lot more before I see the pixels, because my Ravenswood pastel brush has more pixels to do its thing, and that is to stamp down little clusters of pixels that look like pastel. Now, how big, that depends upon the kind of work you're doing. For the Drippy Cat Art Studio, I've provided a whole load of A4 paper, and if you take a look at the dimensions, you've got 3,508 by 2,480. That is enough for you to print out an A4 piece of paper at 300 dots per inch. If you were to print it out on an A3 piece of paper, well, you've already heard, with modern printers, you can get away with a lot less dots per inch. And also, well, A4, yeah, we tend to look at that at reading distance, but A3, that's more the kind of thing we look at from further away. So there's a good chance you're going to get away with printing out that particular paper at A3 size, and you're not going to have too many problems. But again, it depends on the kind of picture you're doing. Let's come back to Anna the Angler. I zoomed in on these little fine, crisp lines. You can see the pixels. Now I'm going to focus in on a bit behind the eye where I've got some gentle shading. The bits where I've got a thick black line, yeah, you can see the pixels, but the bit where you've got this soft transition from a mid-orange to a lighter orange, it is much less obvious. The individual pixels become much less obvious. So your take from this is, if you're doing a fairly soft, pastel-y type drawing, then you don't need as many dots per inch. But if you're doing a drawing which contains a lot of ink, and let me give you an example of that. How about the Moors in progress? We saw this briefly on the explainer videos when I was talking about how to use the dotty brushes inside the Drippy Cat library. For something like this, this has a lot of sharp, clearly defined lines and a whole load of dots. So for something like this, you need more dots per inch because there's a lot more fine detail in there. Now, what's the size of that? That is 4,526 by 5,523. So the kind of sizes I've shown you here, those are good working limits. Try not to make your work too small. Try not to use screen size. For the most part, if you work within these limits, let's take a look at Puppy Finished. 3,508 by 4,695. This is from the Learn to Draw course. Soft textures plus some pretty fine detail around, say, the nose, for example, or around the eyes. If you are creating something and you know eventually it is going to go to print, what you do is you come to inches. This immediately changes the field where you enter your numbers. And I'm going to say I want something which is, say, 16 by 12 inches. And at this point, yes, 300 dpi, that matters. Because what Procreate is going to do is going to say, okay, so I'll multiply 16 by 300 and I'll do the same for the height, 12 times 300. I create it, There's my file. Oh, look, I can draw on it. If I come to canvas information, dimensions, 4,800 pixels by 3,600 pixels. So you enter the inches, you tell it how many dots per inch, and it works it all out for you and gives you these dimensions. Let's do that once more, because I'm not sure how to describe this, but I remember if I was working in pixels and I had, say, 4,800 by 3,600, I get this field here called DPI set to 300. And I would think to myself, if there's a DPI field there at 300, well, it must do something. If it didn't do anything, then why would the makers of this software put that field there? And so I kind of thought there was the pixels that I'm creating, and you can see them there, but also there must be some kind of secret invisible pixels when you set it to 300 DPI that magically mess with the amount of pixels I'm entering. I don't know how to describe this, but can I put it much more simply for you? If you're working in pixels, that DPI number is nothing more than a misleading waste of time. It has no effect whatsoever. Look, I'll show you. So 4,800 by 3,600 at 300 dots per inch. There's my file. Whoopee. Let's come back, do the same thing again. 4,800 by 3,600, but now I'm going to enter 150 dots per inch. Did you notice my maximum layers didn't change? It's still 104 maximum amount of layers. And the width and the height have not changed one tiny bit. All right, let's try. 600 dots per inch. The canvas stays the same size and the maximum layers stays the same. So this DPI number is a waste of time. Look, I'll create this. Do my little squodge. Let's do a different color squodge so you know I'm working on a different file. Come to canvas information, dimensions, 4,800 by 3,600. The DPI is still set to 600, but the amount of pixels I've got to work with have not changed a bit. Let's compare that with the one I did earlier. Canvas information, dimensions, the exact same dimensions at 300 DPI, and the amount of pixels I've got to work with have not changed a bit. It only matters when you come to print something out. Otherwise, when you create new canvases, as long as you're in pixels, put in any amount of pixels that you want. And this number, the DPI, does not make a blind bit of difference. In fact, come on, let's do it. 72 dots per inch, because sometimes I've heard people say, if you're creating something for the screen, no, you don't. That magic number is more than 40 years out of date. Okay. I'm sorry if that was a long listen, and I'm sorry if I got a little bit ranty at one or two points. But in order to explain DPI and when it's important, I had to spend some time just taking away some of the myths and the magic numbers that surround dots per inch. But now you know more about dots per inch than quite a few professionals, so you don't need to worry about DPI anymore. You know what you're doing. And that makes you free to worry about a whole load of other things. And for that, you are most welcome. Okay, if this video is useful for you, I hope you'll do the usual thing of liking and subscribing. And if you do, thank you very much, and I will see you in another video on this channel.